everyone. Good evening, good evening. I'm so glad y'all are all here. My name is Bailey Dingley, and it is my honor to introduce our guest speaker tonight. And when I say it is my honor, it truly, truly is my honor, and I'm so excited to introduce Micael Wear. I've personally found myself in the constant struggle between faith and politics. In Wear's book, Reclaiming Hope, Lessons Learned in the Obama White House about the Future of Faith in America, which can be found in the back, expertly articulates how faith intertwines with politics. I think we can all agree that we need voices that speak boldly about this topic and further encourage us to be bold in our own faith and politics. Wear directed faith outreach for President Obama's historic 2012 re-election campaign. Wear was also one of the youngest White House staffers in modern American history. He served in the White House Faith-Based Initiative during President Obama's first term, where he led evangelical outreach and helped manage the White House's engagement on religious and value issues, including adoption and anti-human trafficking efforts. Wear currently serves as the chief strategist and member of the executive team for the AND campaign. Wear is also the founder of Public Square Strategies, LLC, a sought-after firm that helps religious organizations, political organizations, businesses, and others effectively navigate the rapidly changing American religious and political landscape. He has written more than just Reclaiming Hope. He also writes for The Atlantic, Christianity Today, USA Today, Relevant Magazine, and other publications on faith, politics, and culture. He's a senior fellow at the Trinity Forum, and he holds an honorary position at the University of Birmingham's Cadbury Center for the Public Understanding of Religion. Wear and his wife, Melissa, are both proud natives of Buffalo, New York, and now reside in Northern Virginia with their daughter. We hope that you are excited to learn from his vast experience that has made him an expert in two polarized fields today. Tonight's event will go till about 8:15 and will include a question and answer session, so be ready for that. Now please join me in welcoming Micael Wear.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here, honor to be able to meet so many faculty and students. Thank you for that introduction. So inspiring to be able to meet students who are engaged in their college and also the community around them. It is a real blessing to be here, an honor to be given this lecture. I've been looking forward to this for months, and I'm excited to meet as many of you, students, faculty, members of the community as possible. I'm here this evening to share with you a bit of my story, some thoughts on how we ought to think about politics, and the role of faith in American life. And as she mentioned, we'll be sure to reserve some time at the end for Q&A. I'm going to be talking about some big issues and ideas today, so I thought it might be helpful to provide a bit of context on my background and how I ended up working in politics and Christian leadership. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, the son of a single mother who worked multiple jobs to keep our family afloat. I was very close as a young boy to my grandfather, who was part of the Greatest Generation, fought in World War II, came back, served in his local community, was a civically minded man, not very partisan, but had a commitment to community. Growing up, my family was not particularly religious. In Buffalo, it seemed as if everyone was born Catholic. It was a faith of rituals and rhythms that kind of gave structure to the weeks and years. Religion was like, quote, brushing your teeth in the morning, my mother said. You just did it, which is not the rousing call to faith that maybe some would like to hear. The millennial generation is the first to grow up in a time when religious skepticism is pervasive and accepted in mainstream American culture. And like many of my peers, I internalized messages about religion that I did not really understand myself. I was convinced the Bible was self-contradictory, though I had never read it. I viewed religion as a crutch without interrogating the actual experiences of religious people. I believed religion was anti-intellectual without considering the brilliance of the religious people I knew, or the fact that many of the great intellectuals of human history were themselves religious. In the same way, many in previous generations considered themselves to be Christian because it was reinforced by their peers and culture. I assumed God was unknowable and irrelevant, if God existed at all. And yet I could not escape God. This God who did not exist was everywhere. And so when I was about 15, I Well, let me give you a bit more of the story. My sister is 5.5 years older than I was, and she became a Christian and immediately started working on me. And because we lived together, I couldn't get away from her. So it was like having an evangelist in the bedroom next door. But I was quintessential younger brother and always picking at her and finding some way to be annoying. And so we'd have arguments. I remember one time she was trying to sit down and read me some passage from Scripture. And she had one of those big leather-bound Bibles that you get when you first become a Christian, but it's so like inefficient that it's, you don't think about like the practicalities of owning a 25-pound Bible, and then you're like, I can't take this anywhere. TSA won't let me take it on a plane. But I just picked up the Bible and I just chucked it right at her face. So that was the state of my spiritual life at the time. She asked me to go to a youth group with her, and at this point, it was just like, okay, I'll get some more ammunition to just show her how silly all of this is. And so went to the youth group, hated it. It was cliquey. I didn't know anybody there. They all knew each other. They were all kind of mean. I remember there was this one girl who walked up to me, was friends with my sister, knew I wasn't a Christian. She goes to me, what's your favorite book in the Bible? And before I could answer, she goes, mine is Hezekiah. And of course, I didn't know. I was just like, what a coincidence. That's mine too. That's my favorite book too. We have a real connection here. It wasn't until years later I found out there is no book of Hezekiah. That's like the meanest thing that you could possibly do to somebody. I should be over it by now, but I'm saying it in a keynote lecture, so it's like, get over it, dude. It was 15 years ago. So I left that youth group not feeling great, but on my way out, there was a volunteer there who was handing out tracts of Romans, just Paul's letter, no commentary, no nothing. I took it. He was standing quite wisely next to the garbage can. I was wise enough and polite enough to not throw it out right in front of him, and so I ended up taking it home. I read it over again. 72 hours later, my sister is driving me home from school, told her I'd given my life to Christ. It changed everything. I was already interested in politics, mostly because of my grandfather. Then I thought, well, now I need to go to seminary, become a pastor, because that's what I should do. I'm a Christian now, so. But thankfully I had a pastor who was like, Michael, look around. There are Christians who aren't pastors. You should. And I thought, oh man, that's a great observation. I knew these two things. Number one, I knew that politics was affecting faith, not just the other way around. I saw it in the world around me. So this was 2004, 2005. I knew that it just wasn't a matter of politics affecting faith. Faith was, it wasn't just a matter of faith affecting politics. Politics was affecting the way that we thought about faith in this country. And number two, I knew that I was never going to feel comfortable in politics again. Before I was a Christian, I could kind of subscribe fully to a political platform and ideology. Now that I was a Christian, I was taking orders from something that's a little more transcendent than whatever the political parties decide on every 4 years. That path led me to George Washington University. I decided sort of the core vocational question of my life has been, what does it mean to be faithful in public things? And so I went to George Washington University to try and figure that out. My second year there, I was supposed to be leading a group of students to a political convention in town at a local hotel. I show up at the hotel, and it's dead, but I was 19. I didn't know it was my first political convention, so I'm like, I'll knock on the right door, I'll walk around this place and find the convention. 10 minutes, 50 minutes later, I finally asked the receptionist, where is this thing? Where is this political convention? She goes, oh, honey, that's not for another couple days. I just had completely the wrong date for this thing. Gives you a sense of how organized I was back then. So I'm embarrassed, dejected, my head is hanging low. I'm leaving the hotel through the hotel lobby, And walking into the lobby for meetings the day or two before the convention was a young senator who I'd followed for years, but had not announced he was running for president yet, Barack Obama. He would announce he was running for president officially just a few days later, so he didn't have Secret Service staff with him. He was pretty well known, but again, not a presidential candidate yet, and so he basically walked up to me, and I told him I believed in his vision, told him I wanted to work for him, and 10 months later, I was in Iowa for the Iowa caucus. We won in Iowa. I went to Chicago, where I was an intern doing faith outreach for him, and then my first paid job was on the inauguration, where I helped run the National Prayer Service. I served in the White House for the first 3.5 years of the Obama administration. Again, previous to that, I was a part of the faith outreach team for the 2008 election. I had the honor of leading faith outreach for the president's re-election campaign. I just want to share 3 lessons that I kind of learned from that, just for those of you who I think this is applicable not just to politics, but just to life. One, when you find something you want to have, an opportunity that you want to seize, I'd advise you to find the line between persistence and annoyance and stay just to the left of it. Find the line between persistence and annoyance and stay just to the left of it. So I met Barack Obama in the hotel lobby. He connected me with a couple staffers, and I hounded them mercilessly, or I guess just to the left of mercilessly. Emails every couple weeks. Sometimes it would just be to let them know, hey, I'm alive, I'm here, if y'all need me. Sometimes it would be a paragraph or 2 on what I thought they could be doing differently and that kind of thing. I wanted to stay on their radar. I think there are times at which I felt, and I feel like young people can often feel like if you're following up with somebody, you're degrading yourself. Like, if they don't want me, if they can't tell by just the way I carry myself that I'm someone they need, then really they don't deserve me. These are all busy people, whether it's in politics or whatever field you're going into. These are folks that they don't know you. You meeting them was maybe a significant moment in your life. Maybe that meeting will be significant for them at some point in the future, but they don't know that yet. And so find that line. If it's something you really want, if it's something that you have your eyes on, don't hound people. Don't make them feel like they got to get a restraining order or something. But find that line between persistence and annoyance and stay just to the left of it. Number 2, once you get in the door, no job is beneath you. On a political campaign, especially, I was an intern. If I was an ignorant, naive one when I started. I was like, okay, I'm here now, so like, where's the president? And I got some things to tell him. But I quickly came to understand, like, if I'm going to be useful here, I need to be useful where they need me, not where I want them to need me. They have people who are getting paid to do important things. I could plug in where the opportunity presents itself. But for now, what they need is people who are willing to make copies, people who are willing to do Excel spreadsheets, people who are willing to do the work that they don't have the time to do. By understanding that no job is beneath you, I think it builds character, helps show a fidelity to the effort, the overall enterprise, and I think really importantly, it builds empathy, so that when you're in a position of managing people, that you understand what it's like to do the tasks that receive little thanks. And maybe you'll be a little more gracious towards those that are under your care. And then just a third thing would be that specialties and focus help. I had a very particular focus. I was interested in the intersection of faith and politics, was interested in helping Senator Obama connect with religious leaders. If I had been a 19-year-old with an interest in labor politics or communications broadly or public policy broadly, probably would have been very difficult for me to find a path, find a trajectory. But because I had a very deep and specific focus area and expertise, when something with religion came up, I was one of the few people in the office who could, even as an intern, who could raise their hand and say, yeah, I know that person. Yes, I'm familiar with this issue. Yes, I've read that book. So that helped. From those 5 years, so the campaigns with the White House in between, at the center of power in our nation's politics, I was able to see up close some of our nation's finest minds try to tackle some of our most pressing policy challenges. I was inspired by much of what we were able to achieve and humbled by the moments, opportunities, and accomplishments that I was able to be a part of bringing to fruition. We were able to get the adoption tax credit finalized and made permanent, which was important to me, important to the nation, I think. We helped the administration bolster the fight to end modern slavery. We elected the nation's first African-American president, and the president's various remarks on the intersection of faith and American life. I was able to be a part of those. I learned many lessons about our country, our politics, and the way faith intersects with it all during my time working for President Obama. Some of those lessons uplifting and hopeful, some of them difficult. And since I left formally working for the president, and as I've traveled the country over the last few years, I've become increasingly concerned about what politics is doing to our communities, our relationships, and our souls. Religion and politics are the two topics you're not supposed to discuss at the dinner table. Have you all heard this phrase? Thanksgiving coming up, you better hear. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why this is? It wasn't until recently that I came to think that the saying is generally true, but for opposing reasons. People don't want to talk about politics because they hold their views too tightly. Too much of their identity is staked in politics. People don't want to talk about religion because they are haunted by the idea that they do not stake their lives in the spiritual things enough, that God takes up too little space in their life. In his essay, Membership, C.S. Lewis writes, "A sick society must think much about politics as a sick man must think much about his digestion. However, if either comes to regard it as the natural food of the mind, if either forgets that we think of such things only in order to be able to think of something else, then what was undertaken for the sake of health has become itself a new and deadly disease." I've traveled this country over the last 4 years, and I've come to the conclusion that our culture, those in our churches and many of our citizens, are sick with that new and deadly disease. The American Psychological Association found that 52% of Americans felt additional stress due to the 2016 election. They called it election stress disorder, and they recommended steps people could take for relief. Teachers reported students were fearful about the election outcome, even to the extent that they were having nightmares about it. In a follow-up study from the APA, the numbers jumped. They showed that the number of Americans who view the future of the country as a significant stressor had jumped to 69%. Those who saw the political climate as a source of stress had jumped to 62%. A 2010 study found that, quote, "societal shifts in political dominance can impact biological stress responses in voters whose political party becomes sociopolitically subordinate." In other words, if your party loses, your stress levels go way up. Just last month, a new study was released which showed nearly two out of every 5 Americans said politics is stressing them out. 1 in 5 are sleepless or have had friendships damaged over politics. Political campaigns understand and feed into this emotional pull of politics. Increasingly, political messages are not about policies. Instead, the policies proposed on the campaign trail are about sending a message and propping up the desired narrative. Our politics, and this is important, our politics is both driven by and guiding our emotions. Patrick Miller, an academic at Duke, offered an important corrective to sort of conventional wisdom about emotion and politics in his 2011 paper, which showed that it is not just or even primarily low information, disengaged voters who allow emotion to guide their politics, but principally citizens with high political sophistication. It's the most educated who are most driven by emotion in their politics. The influence of political tactics is not confined to campaign dynamics. It affects how we are formed as people. Political polarization is at an all-time high by some metrics. Instead of our values influencing our politics, our political circumstances are shaping our values. As partisans, we explain away the flaws of the candidate we support, and we buy nearly any outlandish theory about the candidate we oppose. We even change what we believe to fit the moment. We're all now aware of the research that shows how political polarization is no longer a province of DC and sort of political centers of power, but it's seeped out into the broader public. Political identity is now reflected in our friendships and romantic lives, where we live and the media we consume,
A 2012 study, Bill Bishop's 2008 book, The Big Sort, contends that Americans are increasingly geographically segregated. We choose to live near people who think the way we do. And over the last 50 years, we've seen, listen to this, an 800% increase in the percentage of Americans who would be upset if their child married someone who belonged to a different political party than they do. So, just to spell this out, in the 1960s, when parents were asked, who would you not want your child to marry? The answer was, I would not want my child to marry someone of a different religion, would not want my child to marry someone of a different race. In 2014, same question was asked. If the parent was a Democrat, they said, I would not want my child to marry a Republican. If the parent was a Republican, they said, I would not want my child to marry a Democrat. It's stunning. Think about what that means. I mean, the political implications of that are clear. But think about what that means just for basic social cohesion, for how we live together. If we're basing our most social, intimate relationships on something as fleeting, as liquid as partisan identity. Politics is causing great emotional and spiritual harm in Americans' lives, and a big reason for that is Americans are going to politics to have their spiritual needs met. This is the meaning of rising polarization. It's the cause of our zero-sum mentality. Politics does a poor job of meeting spiritual needs, but if it will get your vote, politicians will attempt to fill the spiritual void nonetheless. Our politics can only cause such spiritual harm because our national life has become so spiritually vacuous. What we must recognize if we are to properly diagnose and treat that which ails our politics is that the state of our politics is a reflection of the state of our souls. Politicians can only manipulate those most personal parts of ourselves, our longings, our loves, our hurts, our passions, and our hatreds for their purposes, because we make these things available for their use. The problem is not that we take politics too seriously, but that we take politics seriously in all of the wrong ways. Of course, Christians have been as complicit as anyone else in the state of our politics. And we need to come to grips with the fact that the state of our politics is, in the end, again, a reflection of the state of our souls. And when I say that, I'm not talking about everybody else's souls, I'm talking about our souls. A reflection of who we are and the kind of people we are. And for Christians, the problem is not so much that there are broad swaths of Christians who make exceptionally bad contributions to our politics, but rather that for many there is nothing exceptional about their politics at all. We are so often driven by the same self-interested, self-protecting motives as other voters. We are so often prone to the same partisan rationalizations, a politics of contempt as our political opponents, whoever they are. And so a reasonable question to ask then, a question many Christians are asking today, is why should we even care about politics? Knowing that politics has the risk of exposing such weaknesses in us, knowing that politics has the capacity for causing such harm, isn't withdrawal the best option? We can draw on many places in Scripture and in the Christian tradition that would help us understand how our faith pushes us toward the public. But let's talk about Jeremiah's message to the exiles. These people, God's people, found themselves in a land that was not their own among a people who despised them. Yet Jeremiah's prophecy to them did not suggest that they lie low or that they take a posture of opposition toward the Babylonians. No, instead they are instructed to, quote, seek the peace and prosperity of the cities which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, for if it prospers, you too will prosper. For Christians, one inescapable conclusion of this extraordinary command is that we are obliged to work for the benefit and flourishing of all people, whether or not they see the world as we do or agree with us in any way. Christians' obligation is not to their tribe, but to their God, a God who cares deeply for all people. And if a Christian's political ideas and actions are not intended toward the good of their enemies, their political witness is not Christian in its character. When it is, everybody benefits. Christians care about politics because we care about our neighbors and our communities. And political decisions impact our neighbors' well-being. As a citizen, you do not choose to have political influence, you already have it. Therefore, sitting out of politics does not absolve you of blame for the state of our politics. Your sitting out is your choice about how to steward the responsibility you have been given. You are a citizen already. Faithfulness is not confined to any one sphere of life. It may look different in different arenas, but faithfulness is for all of life, including the political. And a holistic pursuit of justice and the well-being of our neighbors is inconceivable without political involvement. Politics is one of the essential forms in which we can love our neighbor. Politics is one of the essential forms in which we can love our neighbor. And so what I want to do is begin to stoke in us an imagination for what our politics would look like if Christians were more Christian. How might we think about politics differently if we participated in politics grounded in a confidence that Jesus actually has something worthwhile to offer us in that endeavor? I've spoken about polarization already, but I just want to add a few thoughts about party identity and how it feeds polarization. Because our parties are so polarized and party identity is so profound, we find that politicians and political parties have inordinate influence over the views of the citizenry. We have not invested such meaning into what a political party is and what it means to affiliate with one because of the nature of a political party, but because of what is in the interest of political parties and other political actors who benefit from them. This is to say, political parties demand our allegiance not because it is their right, but because it is in their interest. Political parties are best thought of as vehicles for carrying the views and the aspirations of the public, not as identity markers or brands to which you subscribe. We should be members of a political party because we believe things. We should not believe things because we are members of a political party. So I want to zoom in from the philosophical and thematic and talk specifically about some of what we're seeing in our politics today that kind of reflects some of these ideas. Incivility, vulgarity, and indecency are now widely viewed as tactics in the political toolbox, viewed as having utility that's rationalized away as necessary to achieve political victory or some policy end. And people who work in politics are willing to go on the record with these views. A July 17, 2019 New York Times story ran with a headline, quote, "With name-calling and Twitter battles, House Republican campaign arm copies Trump's playbook." The story went on to describe a concerted, strategic effort to, quote, alienate swing voters by tagging all House Democrats as socialists, anti-Semites, or far-left extremists, end quote. This is done by popularizing and institutionalizing name-calling and epithets as an official strategy of the Republican campaign arm. So, for instance, a moderate Democrat, Max Rose, who served in the military and was awarded a Purple Heart, was tagged in digital attacks as Little Max Rose. Let me read a couple of graphs from this story. Quote, "Republican campaign operatives backing the strategy argued that aggressive tactics were necessary to rouse the interest of sleepy and shrunken local press corps. Adopting the mantra that all news is good news, the committee appears to believe that even if reporters choose instead to write about its bare-knuckle tactics, they are at least reiterating the nicknames and points that House Republicans hope will reach voters. If that's what it takes to get a story," said Mike Shields, who joined the National Republican Congressional Committee as director of its independent expenditure program, "there needs to be a shift in mindset to be in the majority. It's better than getting no coverage at all." The story goes on to note that some Republican members pushed back, expressing disappointment and disapproval of the personal attacks, but the committee continued to defend their tactics. So, right, Republicans are awful. Fast forward to just last week. The New York Times reported on the internal debate within the Democratic Party infrastructure about whether or not to try to fight fire with fire when it comes to digital advertising. The article reported that, quote, "Democrats are struggling to match more than the sheer volume of content coming out of the Trump campaign. Interviews with Democratic consultants and experts revealed a party deeply hesitant to match the Trump campaign's intense and often angry partisan approach." But the story went on to cite anonymous Democratic staffers who were upset that more senior staff had rejected their attempts to air aggressive, divisive ads meant to, quote, "fire up the base." One digital strategist who was willing to go on the record is quoted as saying this, quote, "Republicans are not messaging around unity and stability because those things don't mobilize people," Ms. Spears said, adding that while everyone may want to live in a less divided country, nobody takes time off work, gets in their car, and drives to the polls to vote specifically for that. there's an algorithmic bias that inherently benefits hate and negativity and anger. In other words, what she's saying is, by algorithmic bias, the subtext of that is the voters reward hate, negativity, and anger. And so therefore, that's the strategy we should take. We could go on and on, but I hope my central point here is clear. We are in a vicious feedback loop of a citizenry that makes itself available for and incentivizes political tactics that degrade people and degrade our politics, which leads to a normalization or embeddedness of these kinds of political tactics and approaches. The question then is, how do we break this circuit? And are there viable examples of civic activity that can expand our political and moral imaginations and influence what citizens expect of their politics? One moment of the 2012 campaign remains a high point for me, and a reminder that our politics can actually create good culture, not just division and insecurity. Jenna Lee Nardella, who's a friend, is something of a wonderkind. At age 22, she co-founded and served as the executive director of Bloodwater Mission, a nonprofit that has raised more than $25 million. It was founded by Jars of Clay, the band, for those of you who know Jars of Clay. Bloodwater has brought water to more than 1 million people in Africa, provided health care for more than 62,000 people in HIV-affected areas. Jenna's influence and example also had an outsized impact on the justice conversation in the American church. The Democratic Convention lasts 3 days, so as the person who was leading religious outreach for the campaign, that meant I had 6 slots for an invocation and benediction each night for the convention. And so I asked Jenna Lee to serve in one of those slots. For an evangelical Christian, the decision to speak at the Democratic Convention like this could not be taken lightly. Sort of the last thing you want to do is get involved in a controversy that could harm your ministry, either from anti-religious inquiry or from a donor base upset that you would dare pray with Democrats. Jenna asked for a bit of time to consider the invitation, during which she prayed, consulted with her husband and the board of her organization, and they encouraged her to take the opportunity, and so Jenna accepted. I smiled when I received an email from Jenna with the text of her prayer a few days before the convention, and a campaign staffer flagged something in the text. Jenna had included a prayer for Mitt Romney too. I assured the staffer that this would be okay, and that, well, it was too late to negotiate an alternative anyways, and so we just have to move forward. And so on the night of the convention, directly following First Lady Michelle Obama, Jenna walked out, and with heads bowed and eyes closed, she led a stadium full of Democrats in praying for Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, and for our nation. She actually wrote the benediction so that it was basically the same text in the first paragraph and the second paragraph. She just switched out Mitt Romney's name for Barack Obama's in the second paragraph. The prayer was a ray of light in a pretty depressing campaign season. Christians and others shared the video of Jenna's prayer online as an example of what can happen when we hold our faith and each other's dignity as more sacred than partisan politics. And in an increasingly polarized politics and culture, this is a powerful posture that we can take. We can take risks in the political arena to affirm that some things are more foundational than partisan politics. And when we see others do so, we can support them as they face people who do not understand. What Jenna taught us that evening was that politics can be about more than winning. There are moments when public officials have been able to directly communicate this as well. I think of John McCain infamously defending Barack Obama at a campaign rally during the 2008 campaign when a questioner said she was terrified of Obama and what he'd do if he was elected, and questioned whether he was born in America. And John McCain said, I disagree with Barack Obama on important policy matters, but he's a good man who loves this country. This was his political opponent just weeks before election day. I also think of an interesting document that Pete Buttigieg's campaign released in the early months of their effort in this election year. They called it a Rules of the Road document, and it lays out 10 principles and values that the Buttigieg campaign will hold to a set of commitments to values or characteristics like respect, belonging, and joy. Here is what is written under the header justice. Quote, "There is no point mounting an unorthodox underdog campaign unless it is one of substance. We have the opportunity to bring meaningful ideas forward for debate. We will take questions seriously and answer them directly. We will lay aside the superficial in favor of the meaningful. We embrace complicated challenges and will work to improve the overall dialogue in how campaigns talk about policy," end quote. Under responsibility, the statement reads, "The conduct of a campaign can be as influential as its outcome." It's a countercultural notion. The conduct of a campaign can be as influential as its outcome. Everyone on this team has a responsibility to live up to our values, and every participant, from a first-time volunteer to the candidate and top staff, must model this, end quote. It's easy to dismiss something like this as a gimmick, but here's the thing. Presidential campaigns are full of gimmicks. They're unavoidable. You could look at presidential campaigns as one big, long-running gimmick. The explicit goal of a campaign is to win, and everything they do rightly needs to be oriented toward that goal. So when we say that we want presidential campaigns to be, quote, authentic, what we often mean is that we want them to feel authentic to us. We want the performance to be convincing. But what if we viewed the actions of campaigns not as performances to be graded, but as opportunities for accountability? By putting out a document like this, Buttigieg sets a standard, yes, but it's a standard he can now be held accountable to. It's a standard that can be leveraged to extract what otherwise might not be possible. There's a commitment that I read in the document that says that his policy team will take questions seriously and answer them directly. Well, what might it look like for those concerned about religious freedom to present the Buttigieg campaign with a set of sincere, good faith questions on his policies regarding religious freedom and hold him accountable to answer them directly via his campaign's promise, their rules of the road? A related idea that I put forward in my book concerns the fact that many elected officials only feel accountable to their base, to those who voted for them, rather than all they represent. Here's one example of how a biblical imagination might motivate real change from the grassroots up. When the Apostle Paul was writing to the Galatians, he was addressing a community that was in deep disunity. Paul had helped form the Galatians through his teachings, but they were straying from their foundational commitments. Sin, false teachers, parochial motives, and interests were creating, well, polarization. Paul is writing in Galatians to a deeply polarized community. Paul's letter to the Galatians then represents an attempt to speak clarity into the conflict and help the community reform around its foundations. And it is into this polarized environment that Paul instructs them to do something radical, something completely contrary to everything polarization promotes. He tells them that they ought to, quote, carry one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the love of Christ. Paul's command shows no favoritism. His call is not to one group only, to those with power or without it, or even solely to the strong or the weak. Everyone together is part of a community as children of the same God, and therefore they ought to carry one another's burdens. A nation is a different sort of community, but it is a community. And the call to carry another's burden is an extraordinary one, but these are extraordinary times. In our increasingly polarized nation, when many elected officials and their strategists believe they need to listen only to those who already agree with them, we must carry our neighbors' burdens into politics with our own. We should ensure that those we disagree with are heard as well. There are some structural reforms that can address this problem. So Lee Drutman, for instance, has a book coming out next month where he'll advance his case for multi-member congressional districts, and I think it's a compelling idea. But I've become convinced that attempts at such structural reforms are likely to be foiled or undermined from within without a reformation of civic character. Citizens themselves need to become less susceptible, less likely to reward bad actors than destructive politics. Structural changes like this require a citizenry formed to desire an inclusive democracy and representation. But from what resources can we draw from to support something like that? Here we get to matters not principally about civic character, but even more deeply about spiritual character, about spiritual formation. We need to become the kind of people our politics needs. And so let me close with this. I recount a story in my book about a German psychologist, Herbert Plug. Herbert Plug, in 1962, published a series of essays based on his experiences working with patients who had attempted to commit suicide or who were incurably ill. What hope could these people possibly have or find, Plug asked. What hope did they lose? Plug discovered that in addition to some of kind of the colloquial little hopes that we speak of kind of flippantly, sort of, I hope that this parking spot opens up. I hope that girl calls me back. There's a more fundamental or authentic hope. A Catholic historian remarked that, quote, one almost senses the surprise of discovery in Plug's account of this. While the hopes mentioned earlier, the little hopes, are directed towards something worldly, something to be fully attained, quote, fundamental hope is not directed toward anything that one could have, but rather has something to do with what one is. There's another finding from Plug's work that's valuable for our discussion, a finding the Catholic historian noted as well, and that is the troubling idea that real hope, or fundamental hope, only comes once our little hopes are proven to be insufficient or flat out false. It is when our little hopes are disappointed that we find ourselves situated between the harshness of despair and the daunting, unusual existence of an authentic hope. I believe it is hope that our politics lacks right now. And in the midst of a season of intense political conflict, it can become easy to lose sight of that. It can become easy to get distracted, to be concerned with point scoring and responding to violence and aggression in kind, to leave no quarter. But for all of the strident polarization that has defined our politics and culture, the cynicism and bravado that is on the surface of our politics, what we must come to terms with is that this frantic performance belies a lack of confidence, not an abundance of it. Our politics today is a politics of the disappointed, or what Parker Palmer referred to as the politics of the brokenhearted. It is the same brokenheartedness that Plug identified in his study. The brokenheartedness of the failure of little hopes, the inadequacy of our planning, the inadequacy of our politics. We are surrounded by broken hearts. This is the source of so much of the fear and anger and distress, isolation and antagonism of our politics today. But in this period of profound disappointment, I believe, lies the opportunity for something new, for us to make new decisions as a people. This time of upheaval gives us the opportunity to replant ourselves in firmer soil. We have the opportunity to proclaim hope when it is most unbelievable, when the way out of our current disorder remains unclear. And we should take it. We must become the kind of people our politics needs, and we must help others in that work as well. And that work must begin now. Thank you.